Aoria gleamed like a jewel in the cosmos, its skyscrapers rising toward the heavens, their glassy surfaces reflecting the sunlight in prismatic hues. From above it appeared as if the city itself was alive, shimmering with an ethereal glow that pulsed with the hum of advanced technology and the rhythm of human life. The city's skyline was dominated by sleek towers and grand public spaces, where nature and technology coexisted harmoniously. Hovercrafts zipped between buildings, and the streets below were alive with people from all walks of life, drawn to Aoria's promise of progress, creativity, and opportunity. In one of these towering structures, high above the bustling streets, lived a young woman named Lila. From the window of her room, Lila could see the whole city spread out beneath her, a breathtaking view she had known her entire life, yet lately it had begun to feel distant and cold. As the only child of one of Aoria's most influential families, Lila had grown up surrounded by luxury, art, and science. The daughter of Lord Calais and Lady Lyra, she had been nurtured in an environment that fostered both intellect and creativity. But as Lila stared out at the glittering city, the view no longer filled her with the sense of wonder it once had. The world had lost its color, as if something vital had slipped away, leaving only shadows behind. Lila's mother, Lady Lyra, had been the center of her universe. A woman of unparalleled grace and intellect, she was both an artist and a scholar, someone who could command attention in any room, not through power or wealth, but through the quiet, confident force of her presence. She had a way of seeing the world that made everything seem possible, and optimism and strength that she had passed on to her daughter. Lila had grown up in the warm glow of her mother's love, and under her guidance she had flourished. She had her father's keen intellect and her mother's artistic soul, and she had been taught that there was no limit to what she could achieve. But all that had changed on the day her mother died. It had been sudden, too sudden. The official report had called it an unfortunate accident, a fall from a balcony in their expansive family estate on the outskirts of the city. But Lila could never quite accept that explanation. Her mother had always been careful, graceful in everything she did. The idea that she had simply slipped felt wrong, hollow. There was something else, something unseen that haunted Lila's thoughts, a darkness lurking behind the tragedy that no one else seemed to notice. Her father, Lord Calais, had been shattered by the loss. A man of science and industry, Calais was one of Aoria's most successful entrepreneurs, known for his groundbreaking innovations in advanced technology. He had always been a figure of strength and certainty in Lila's life, a man who faced every challenge with logic and determination. But after Lyra's death, Calais had become a shell of his former self, retreating into his work as if hoping to drown his grief in data and designs. He rarely spoke of his wife, and when he did, it was with a distance that made Lila feel as though he had buried her memory along with her body. And so Lila was left alone with her sorrow. She tried to find solace in her art, painting and sculpting in the studio her mother had built for her, filling the empty spaces with color and form. But nothing she created could fill the void that her mother's absence had left in her heart. The once bright and vibrant world of Aoria now felt dim, its wonders dulled by the weight of loss. Months passed in this way, with Lila trapped in a cycle of grief and isolation. She rarely saw her father, who spent most of his time locked away in his laboratories. The house, once filled with the warmth of her mother's laughter and the sound of music, now felt cold and oppressive. It was in this atmosphere of silence and mourning that Serafina entered their lives. Serafina had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, an enigmatic and captivating woman who caught Lord Calais' attention during one of his rare business trips. Lila had heard of her before she met her, from the way her father spoke of Serafina with a strange mix of admiration and fascination. It wasn't long before Serafina had made her way into their home, her presence a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled there. Lila remembered the first time she met Serafina, the way the woman's smile had seemed to light up the room as she extended her hand. Serafina was beautiful, with dark, flowing hair and sharp, striking features. Her eyes, a deep, unnatural shade of green, seemed to pierce through everything they looked at. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention, and indeed everyone in her orbit seemed drawn to her, captivated by her charm. At first, Serafina had been nothing but kind to Lila, always speaking to her with warmth and understanding. She seemed eager to help Calais recover from his grief, bringing a new energy into the house. There were dinners filled with lively conversation and laughter, events that once again filled their home with life. Lila wanted to believe that her father had found someone who could help him heal. She wanted to believe that Serafina's presence might somehow ease the ache in her own heart. But from the very beginning, something about Serafina set Lila on edge. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on at first. Serafina was polite, even generous, in her interactions with Lila, but there was always a subtle undercurrent to her words, a hint of something darker lurking beneath her friendly demeanor. It was in the way she would watch Lila when she thought no one was looking, a cold, calculating gaze that made Lila's skin crawl. And there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Serafina's mask would slip, revealing a hardness in her eyes, a flash of contempt or irritation that quickly vanished behind her practiced smile. As time passed, Lila's unease only grew. Serafina and Calais grew closer, their relationship moving faster than Lila had anticipated. Within months, Serafina had moved into their home permanently, and soon after they announced their engagement. Lila tried to voice her concerns to her father, but he was too enamored with Serafina to listen. He dismissed her worries as the overreactions of a grieving daughter, insisting that Serafina was exactly what their family needed: a new beginning, a chance to heal. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her instincts screamed at her to be wary of Serafina, but without any concrete evidence, she had no choice but to keep her suspicions to herself. She wanted her father to be happy, to find peace after everything they had been through, but every time she saw Serafina's cold, calculating smile, a chill ran down her spine. Things changed even more after the wedding. Serafina, once outwardly affectionate and kind, began to show her true colors. It started small, subtle comments meant to undermine Lila's confidence, sharp words spoken in private that contrasted with the public image of the loving stepmother she presented to the world. Serafina began to control more and more of the household, making decisions without consulting Lila or her father, isolating Lila further. Lila found herself growing more and more distant from her father. Calais, once so involved in her life, was now fully consumed by his work, leaving Serafina to manage the household. Serafina's influence over him was undeniable, and any attempt by Lila to reach out to him was met with dismissal or indifference. Her father had changed, and it terrified her to see how completely Serafina had taken over. Then Lord Calais fell ill. It started with small symptoms: fatigue, headaches, moments of confusion that were unlike him. At first, Lila thought it was simply the stress of his work catching up with him, but his condition worsened rapidly. The family doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause of his illness, and no treatment seemed to help. Serafina insisted on taking charge of his care, keeping Lila at arm's length. Day by day, Calais grew weaker, and Lila's worry turned to fear. She tried to spend time with him, but Serafina was always there, hovering like a shadow, making excuses for why Lila couldn't stay long. She spoke of treatments and remedies that never seemed to work, and despite her apparent concern, Lila could sense something insincere in Serafina's words, a coldness that belied her actions. The day her father died was the darkest moment of Lila's life. She was not by his side when he passed. Serafina had kept her away, claiming that it would be too difficult for her to see him in his final hours. Lila could only stand at the door, helpless, as the man who had once been her protector slipped away, leaving her completely alone. The funeral was a blur, a hollow ceremony filled with empty words and false sympathies. Lila stood at the edge of the grave, her heart numb with grief, while Serafina, ever composed, played the role of the grieving widow with perfect precision. But behind Serafina's mourning veil, Lila saw the faintest hint of a smile. Something inside Lila snapped that day. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that Serafina was responsible for her father's death, just as she had been responsible for her mother's. But with no proof and no allies, Lila found herself trapped in a web of despair and suspicion, powerless against the woman who had taken everything from her. And yet, in the depths of her grief, a fire began to burn inside her. She would find out the truth. She would uncover whatever dark secret Serafina was hiding, no matter the cost. But for now she would wait, watching and learning. Her time would come. And when it did, Serafina would pay. The days after her father's death blurred together, in a suffocating haze of grief and disbelief. The once lively halls of the Calais estate were now steeped in an eerie silence, broken only by the whispers of the household staff, and the soft click of Serafina's heels echoing through the corridors. Lila wandered through the mansion like a ghost, her mind consumed by unanswered questions, and a sense of foreboding that refused to leave her. Serafina, now the undisputed mistress of the estate, wasted no time asserting her control. In the weeks following Lord Calais's passing, she transformed the house into something foreign, cold, sterile, devoid of the warmth and elegance that had once filled it. Lady Lyra's art pieces, which had adorned the walls and given the home a soul, were replaced with abstract, emotionless sculptures and stark, impersonal decor. It was as though Serafina wanted to erase every trace of Lila's family, as though she was rewriting the narrative of their lives to suit her own twisted agenda. Lila kept her distance, watching as Serafina seized control of every aspect of the estate, including her father's businesses. The will was read in a quiet, almost dismissive affair, overseen by Serafina's personal attorney, a man who had come into their lives just as suddenly as she had. To Lila's shock and outrage, Serafina was named the sole heir to the Kali's fortune. Everything her father's vast wealth, the estate, the companies he had built from the ground up, was now under Serafina's command. The room had felt like it was closing in on Lila when the announcement was made, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to suffocate her. The will, which should have secured her future and preserved her family's legacy, had been altered in Serafina's favor. Lila could hardly believe what she was hearing. The documents were all signed and sealed, every detail meticulously in place, leaving no room for doubt or challenge. It was as if Serafina had planned this from the beginning, as if she had known exactly how to weave herself into their lives and strip them of everything that mattered. "You must understand," Serafina said, her voice smooth and venomous as silk. "Your father wanted to ensure that the estate was in capable hands. You're still so young, and with the weight of the family business. Well, it's far too much for someone like you to handle right now." Lila's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, her heart pounding in her chest. "Someone like me." The words echoed in her mind, laced with condescension and cruelty. For the first time since her father's death, anger surged through her, breaking through the numbness that had consumed her. "I don't believe you," Lila spat, her voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "My father would never disinherit me. He wouldn't leave everything to you, Serafina. This isn't right." Serafina's lips curled into a smile, a cold, dangerous smile that sent a chill down Lila's spine. She leaned forward, her green eyes glinting with amusement. "Whether you believe it or not, it's the truth. The will has been executed, and the estate is mine to manage. You, my dear Lila, should be grateful that I'm even allowing you to stay here." Lila felt as though the floor had fallen out from beneath her. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Everything she had known, everything she had trusted, had been ripped away in the span of a few words. She tried to appeal to the lawyer, but he merely avoided her gaze, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. There was no one left to help her. Serafina had ensured that. From that moment on, Lila was no longer the daughter of the house. She was an outsider, a prisoner in her own home. Serafina wasted no time in making her position clear. The staff, once loyal to Lila and her family, now answered only to Serafina. Lila found herself isolated, ignored, and ostracized. Meals were taken alone in her room, and every time she tried to enter her father's office or any part of the estate that had once been hers, she was met with locked doors and cold refusals. The weight of betrayal crushed her, but beneath that weight, something else stirred, an ember of determination, of survival. She could feel the pieces of a puzzle falling into place, but the picture was not yet clear. Serafina had been planning this for a long time. That much was obvious. But there had to be more to her motives, more to her plans. And as long as Lila was still breathing, she would find out what it was. Time passed, and Lila's world grew smaller. Her once boundless future had narrowed to the confines of her room and the lingering questions that haunted her every waking moment. Days turned into weeks, and still, she found no way to challenge Serafina's iron grip on the estate. Any attempt to reach out for help was met with silence. Even her closest friends had grown distant, no doubt under the influence of Serafina's manipulations. Lila was truly alone, her mind spinning with 1,000 unanswered questions, all leading back to one central, undeniable truth: Serafina had orchestrated everything. It was one evening when the air outside was heavy with the scent of rain that Lila's world was turned upside down once more. She had been pacing her room, lost in thought, when a knock came at the door. It was strange no one knocked anymore. The staff rarely interacted with her directly, as if they had been instructed to pretend she didn't exist. With a sense of foreboding, Lila opened the door to find a tall, unfamiliar man standing in the hallway. He was dressed in a dark, well-tailored suit, his features sharp and angular, his eyes cold and emotionless. "Miss Lila," he said, his voice low and formal, "your presence is requested in the study." Lila frowned, her heart racing. The study had been off limits to her since Serafina had taken control. What could she possibly want now? With a sense of dread, Lila followed the man down the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. When they reached the study, the man opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, Serafina sat behind the large oak desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Lila, my dear," Serafina purred, "I've been thinking. It's time we discussed your future." Lila's stomach twisted. There was something in Serafina's tone that made her blood run cold, something that hinted at the danger lurking just beneath the surface. "I have no future here." "Thanks to you," Lila replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Serafina's smile widened, her green eyes gleaming with amusement. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. You see, I've made arrangements for you to start a new life. Far away from Aoria, far away from here." Lila felt the ground shift beneath her. A new life. What was she talking about? Before she could respond, the door behind her creaked open. Several figures entered the room, men in dark uniforms, their faces hard and unforgiving. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. Serafina wasn't sending her away. She was selling her. Panic surged through Lila's veins as two of the men moved toward her, their hands outstretched to seize her arms. She struggled, her mind racing as she tried to break free, but they were too strong. The grip on her arms was unrelenting, and within moments they had her restrained, dragging her toward the door. "Serafina," Lila cried, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't do this, you can't do—" "Oh, but I can," Serafina said smoothly, rising from her seat and walking around the desk with the grace of a predator closing in on its prey. "And I am. You see, my dear, you've become inconvenient. And I don't like inconveniences." Lila's vision blurred with panic as she fought against the men holding her, but it was no use. She was being taken away, ripped from her home, her life, with no one to help her, no one to stop Serafina from completing whatever twisted plan she had set in motion. "Where are you taking me?" Lila gasped, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. Serafina smiled, a cold, satisfied smile that made Lila's blood turn to ice. "Somewhere you'll never be found." The slave ship was a nightmare. The cold, metallic walls of the ship's holding cells echoed with the sounds of chains and despair. The air was thick with the stench of fear and sweat, and the low hum of the ship's engines provided a constant, oppressive backdrop to the cries of the other captives. Lila sat in the corner of her cell, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her mind reeling from the horror of her situation. She had been sold like property, shipped off to a distant corner of the galaxy to disappear, just as Serafina had planned. Lila's world had collapsed around her, and all that remained was darkness and uncertainty. How had it come to this? How had she gone from a life of luxury and promise to this hellish reality? But even in the depths of her despair, a spark of defiance still burned within her. Serafina had taken everything from her, but she would not take her spirit. Lila refused to let this be the end. She had to survive. She had to find a way out. Days passed in a blur of cold, hunger, and exhaustion. The ship's crew showed no mercy to the captives, treating them as little more than cargo. Lila's hands were raw from the chains, her body weak from lack of food and rest. And yet, despite the hopelessness of her situation, she clung to the thought of escape. She would not let Serafina win. And then, just when the darkness seemed all-consuming, something changed. Lila was jolted awake one night by the sudden, violent shaking of the ship. Alarms blared through the metal corridors, and the sound of shouting echoed from the upper decks. The ship had been attacked. Panic spread through the holding cells as the captives realized that something was happening, something that could either mean their salvation or their doom. The door to Lila's cell slid open with a hiss, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. A man stood in the doorway, dressed in dark, weathered clothing, his face shadowed by the dim light. He wasn't one of the slavers. His expression was hard, focused, and there was something about the way he held himself that made Lila's heart leap with a flicker of hope. "Come with me if you want to live," he said, his voice low and urgent. Lila hesitated for only a heartbeat before scrambling to her feet. She didn't know who this man was or why he was here, but in that moment it didn't matter. He was offering her a chance to escape the nightmare she had been plunged into. She wasn't going to waste it. The man led her through the chaos of the ship, past bodies of fallen slavers, and through corridors filled with smoke and the sounds of distant fighting. Lila's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing as she followed him, but she knew that whatever awaited her at the end of this escape was better than the fate Serafina had planned for her. As they reached the escape shuttle, the man turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We're getting out of here," he said. "But this is just the beginning." Lila nodded, her mind still reeling, but she knew one thing for certain: she was free. And though she didn't know where this journey would take her, she was ready to face whatever came next. The man introduced himself as Johnson, a member of a resistance group fighting the slave trade, and as the shuttle broke free from the slaver ship, soaring into the vast expanse of space, Lila felt the weight of her past beginning to lift. For the first time since her world had been shattered, she had hope. And with that hope came a new determination. Serafina had taken everything from her, but Lila would take it all back. The stars stretched out like endless pinpricks of light as the shuttle hurtled through the vast, inky expanse of space. Lila stared out the small window, her face illuminated by the distant glow of far-off systems, her mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. Everything she had known, the safety, the comfort, the certainty of her life in Aurea, had been torn away. Now she was adrift, not just in the physical sense, but in her very soul. Johnson, the man who had saved her from the slave ship, sat across from her in the shuttle's cramped cabin, silently working on a device that hummed and blinked with soft blue lights. He hadn't spoken much since they had made their escape, though Lila had caught him watching her with a kind of quiet intensity, as if he were weighing her, measuring the depth of her resolve. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her now. Was she just another lost soul he had rescued, or was there something more? Did he sense the fire that was beginning to burn within her, the fire that Serafina had ignited? Finally, after what felt like hours of silence, Johnson spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and laced with a hint of weariness. "You should try to rest. We'll be reaching Arvion in a few hours." Arvion, Lila asked, blinking away her fatigue. The name was familiar, though distant, like something she had once read about in her studies. Johnson nodded, still focused on the device in his hands. "It's a planet on the outer fringes of the galaxy. Not as advanced as Aurea, but it's home to an old archive, a place where people go to bury secrets or dig them up, depending on who's asking." Lila felt a stir of curiosity despite her exhaustion. "And what are we looking for there?" Johnson's gaze finally lifted to meet hers, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Answers. Proof of what Serafina has done, what she's planning. I heard your story on that ship and I believe you. But if we're going to take down someone as powerful as Serafina, we need more than just accusations. We need evidence." Lila nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. Evidence. Proof. For so long she had been trapped in a web of uncertainty and fear, unable to challenge Serafina because she lacked the one thing that could expose her stepmother's crimes. But now, for the first time, there was a way forward, a path, however perilous, that could lead to the truth. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. It had been nagging at her since the moment Johnson had rescued her. He had no reason to care about her fate, no reason to care about her fate, no reason to risk his life for someone he barely knew. And yet, here he was, offering her a chance at justice. Johnson's expression darkened for a moment, as if he were remembering something painful, something buried deep within him. "I've seen what people like Serafina can do. I've seen entire worlds torn apart by greed, corruption, and the pursuit of power. And I've lost people, good people, because of it." He paused, his jaw tightening. "No one should have to go through what you've been through. And if Serafina is as dangerous as you say, it's not just you who's at risk. She's a threat to the entire galaxy." Lila felt a flicker of something in her chest, a strange mix of gratitude and determination. She didn't know the full story of Johnson's past, but she could sense that he too was carrying the weight of loss and betrayal. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them, two people bound by a shared purpose, united by the scars left by their enemies. "Then we'll find the proof," Lila said, her voice steady with newfound resolve, "and we'll stop her." Johnson gave a small, approving nod before turning his attention back to the device. "Get some rest. You'll need your strength." But Lila found that rest was elusive. Her mind churned with thoughts of what lay ahead, of the secrets buried in the archives of Arvian, of the dangers that awaited them, and of Seraphina, still out there, pulling the strings of her sinister web. As the shuttle hurtled through the dark void, Lila made a silent vow to herself: no matter how far she had to go, no matter what obstacles stood in her way, she would uncover the truth. And when she did, Seraphina would fall. The planet Arvian was a stark contrast to the gleaming city of Eoria, where Eoria was filled with towering skyscrapers, glowing streets, and cutting-edge technology. Arvian was raw, rugged, and unrefined. Its surface was covered in jagged mountains and sweeping deserts, with only a few pockets of civilization scattered throughout its vast expanse. The capital city, Vel Aren, was built into the side of a massive canyon, with buildings that clung to the cliffs like ancient relics. The architecture was old, crumbling in places, with a distinctly utilitarian design. But beneath the surface, Lila sensed a deep history, a place where secrets had been buried for centuries. The shuttle descended into the narrow docking bay carved into the canyon wall, and as they disembarked, the harsh, dry wind of Arvian greeted them with an almost palpable weight. The air was thin, the sky above tinged with the orange hue of the planet's twin suns. Lila wrapped her cloak tighter around her, trying to adjust to the new environment. The gravity felt slightly heavier than she was used to, making each step a bit more laborious. Johnson led the way, his expression set in the same grim determination that had become familiar to her in the short time they had known each other. He moved through the crowded streets of Vel Aren with a purposeful stride, navigating the maze of stone buildings and narrow alleyways, as if he had been there before. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, trying to keep pace with him. "To the archives," Johnson replied, not slowing down. "It's hidden beneath the city, part of an old network of vaults used to store knowledge that certain people wanted forgotten. But if we're lucky, we'll find something that can lead us to the answers we need." As they made their way deeper into the city, Lila couldn't help but notice the suspicious glances cast their way by the locals. Arvian was a place where people lived on the fringes of society: drifters, smugglers, and those looking to escape the watchful eyes of the galaxy's more regulated systems. It was a dangerous place for outsiders, especially for someone like Lila, who had spent her life in the sheltered world of Eoria's elite. But she pushed down the unease, focusing instead on the mission ahead. They reached an unmarked building tucked away in a secluded part of the city. It looked abandoned from the outside, its stone facade cracked and weathered by time. Johnson paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the street behind them before he stepped forward and knocked on the door in a rhythmic pattern: 3 short taps, followed by 2 slow ones. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway lit by dim, flickering lights. A man stood at the entrance, his face partially obscured by a hood, but Lila could see the glint of recognition in his eyes as he looked at Johnson. "You're late," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "We had complications," Johnson replied tersely, "but we're here now." The man stepped aside, allowing them to enter. As they made their way through the narrow passage, Lila could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, symbols and languages she didn't recognize, all speaking to a past that had long been forgotten by the galaxy at large. At the end of the corridor, they emerged into a vast underground chamber, filled with towering shelves and archives that stretched as far as the eye could see. Scrolls, data tablets, and physical books lined the walls, some so old that the paper had begun to crumble at the edges. It was a treasure trove of lost knowledge, hidden away from the prying eyes of the galaxy's rulers. "This is the archive," Johnson said quietly, his voice reverent in the silence of the chamber. "Everything that the galaxy has tried to erase: history, technology, secrets, it's all here. If Seraphina has hidden anything, we'll find it here." Lila's heart raced as she took in the enormity of the task before them. Somewhere in this vast labyrinth of knowledge was the key to exposing Seraphina's crimes, the proof that would bring her to justice. But finding it would not be easy. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice filled with both determination and doubt. Johnson glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We start with what we know. Seraphina's rise to power wasn't an accident. There's something bigger at play here, and I think it started long before she entered your life." For hours they sifted through records, data files, and ancient documents, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at a deeper, more sinister plot. Lila's hands were stained with dust, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of the connections that were slowly emerging. It became clear that Serafina was more than just a cunning manipulator. She was part of a much larger conspiracy, one that reached into the highest levels of galactic governance. The deeper they dug, the more Lila realized just how far Serafina's influence spread. She had orchestrated not just the downfall of Lila's family, but the collapse of entire political systems, working behind the scenes to destabilize governments and consolidate power in the hands of her shadowy allies. There were records of secret meetings, bribes, and assassinations all linked to Serafina and her network. But the most chilling discovery came when they found a sealed file, encrypted with a level of security that suggested it held information too dangerous to be revealed. Johnson worked quickly to break the encryption, his fingers flying over the keys of the data tablet. When the file finally opened, the contents were worse than either of them had imagined. The file contained a detailed plan to overthrow the Galactic Council and seize control of the galaxy's core systems. Serafina had been working toward this goal for years, systematically eliminating anyone who stood in her way. And Lila's family, it seemed, had been one of the final obstacles. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she read through the file, her hands trembling. Her mother's death had been no accident. Her father's illness had been engineered. Every loss, every moment of pain had been part of Serafina's twisted game. "She's planning a coup," Johnson muttered, his eyes dark with anger. "She's been playing the long game, manipulating the political landscape to put herself in a position of ultimate power." Lila felt sick, the enormity of it all crashing down on her. Serafina wasn't just a personal enemy, she was a threat to the entire galaxy. And now, armed with this knowledge, they were the only ones who could stop her. "What do we do now?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Johnson stood, his jaw set in grim determination. "We take this to the Galactic Council. They need to know what she's planning. But we have to move fast. If Serafina gets wind of this, she'll come after us with everything she's got." Lila nodded, the fire inside her burning brighter than ever. Serafina had taken everything from her, her family, her home, her sense of safety. But now Lila had something far more valuable, the truth. And with that truth, she would bring Serafina to her knees. The shuttle hummed as it broke through the atmosphere of the Galactic Council's capital planet, Zanara. Its sleek metal frame reflected the pale light of the system's twin moons, casting long shadows across the shuttle's hull. Lila watched from the viewport, her heart pounding as the majestic spires of the capital city, Telmaris, came into view. It was a world unlike any she had ever seen, vast, sprawling, and ancient, with towering skyscrapers built atop ruins of civilizations long forgotten. The skyline was punctuated by gleaming, angular structures, each one a testament to the enduring power and influence of the Galactic Council. But as awe-inspiring as the city was, Lila couldn't shake the weight of dread that clung to her. This was the heart of the galaxy's political power, the place where decisions were made that affected trillions of lives across the stars. And it was also the place where Serafina had woven her influence, a dark web of manipulation and deceit that reached deep into the halls of power. The shuttle banked smoothly, angling toward the central district, where the council chambers stood like towering monoliths against the darkening sky. Johnson, seated beside her, was silent, his expression hard and unreadable. He hadn't spoken much since they'd left Arvian, though the tension in his posture told Lila all she needed to know. This was it, the moment they had been building toward, the moment they would confront the council with the evidence they had uncovered. And the moment they would confront Serafina. Lila's fingers tightened around the edge of her seat as the shuttle began its descent, landing on one of the many platforms that lined the upper levels of the council's complex. The platform stretched out over the city below, a sprawling expanse of lights and buildings that seemed to pulse with life. But there was a coldness here too, a sense of distance and detachment, as if the people who lived here were removed from the rest of the galaxy, insulated by their wealth and power. As the shuttle doors hissed open, a blast of cool, sterile air rushed in. Johnson stood, his movements brisk and efficient. He glanced at Lila, his eyes sharp and focused. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. "We don't know who Serafina has on her side here, and if she gets wind of what we've uncovered." "She won't," Lila interrupted, her resolve hardening. "We're not letting her stop us. Not this time." Johnson nodded, the barest hint of approval in his eyes. Together they stepped off the shuttle and onto the platform, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on them both. The council chambers loomed before them, a massive structure of polished stone and metal, its towering pillars inscribed with the sigils of the ancient galactic factions that had once governed these lands. But those factions were gone now, their legacies reduced to history and myth. All that remained was the Galactic Council, a body of representatives from across the galaxy's core systems, each one vying for power and influence in a complex dance of politics and intrigue. As they approached the grand entrance, flanked by armored guards in pristine white uniforms, Lila felt a pang of unease. Seraphina's reach was vast, and there was no telling how many of the council members were in her pocket. They were walking into a den of serpents, and even with the evidence they had gathered, it was unclear if they would leave unscathed. "State your business," one of the guards said, his voice clipped and authoritative. Johnson stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "We have an urgent matter to bring before the council. It concerns the security of the galaxy." The guard raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You'll need to be more specific than that." Johnson's hand moved to his belt, pulling out a small device, a holographic tablet containing the encrypted files they had retrieved from the archives on Arvion. "We have proof of a conspiracy, high-level corruption, assassinations. If we don't act, the galaxy will be plunged into chaos." The guard hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between Johnson and Lila before he finally nodded and motioned for them to follow. They were led through a series of grand halls, each one more opulent than the last, filled with intricate tapestries and sculptures that spoke of power and prestige. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the polished floors gleamed under the soft glow of suspended light fixtures. Lila's heart raced as they were ushered into a large, circular chamber, the council's meeting room. It was an awe-inspiring space with towering columns encircling the perimeter, and in the center, a raised platform where the council members sat in their regal chairs. Each seat was adorned with the crest of the system they represented, and their robes shimmered with the colors of their respective houses. The room was filled with quiet murmurs as the council members conferred with one another. But as Lila and Johnson entered, the murmurs died down, and all eyes turned toward them. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment would be daunting, but the weight of so many powerful figures staring down at them made her feel small and exposed. These were the people who held the fate of the galaxy in their hands. And here she was, standing before them, about to accuse one of their own of treason. A voice rang out, strong and commanding. "State your case." It was Councillor Veldar, a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice and piercing eyes. He was one of the most influential members of the council, known for his unflinching dedication to maintaining order across the galaxy. But Lila couldn't tell whether he would be an ally or an enemy in what was to come. Johnson stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "We've come to expose a conspiracy that threatens the stability of the entire galaxy. The evidence we bring links Seraphina." He paused, letting the name hang in the air like a curse, to a series of assassinations, political manipulations, and plans to overthrow the Galactic Council. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. Lila watched as several of the council members exchanged glances, some whispering urgently to their aides. But there was one face among them that remained unreadable, a face that Lila had dreaded to see. Seraphina. There she was, sitting near the far end of the chamber, her expression as cool and composed as ever. Her emerald eyes flicked toward Lila, and for the briefest moment their gazes locked. Seraphina's lips curled into a faint smile, a smile that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. "These are serious accusations," Councillor Veldar said, his tone cautious but intrigued. "If what you say is true, we will need to see the evidence." Johnson didn't hesitate. He activated the holographic tablet, and a series of images and documents appeared in the air above them, files detailing Seraphina's rise to power, encrypted communications, financial transactions, and the detailed plan for a coup that would topple the Galactic Council and place her and her allies in control of the galaxy's core systems. The silence in the chamber was deafening as the council members stared at the evidence, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. For a moment it seemed as though the tide was turning in their favor, that the truth would finally come to light. But Seraphina was not one to be so easily defeated. As the last of the evidence flickered in the air, Seraphina rose from her seat, her movements graceful and deliberate. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room, commanding the attention of every counselor in the chamber. "These allegations are nothing more than a desperate attempt to discredit me," Seraphina said, her voice smooth and confident. The so-called evidence you see before you has been fabricated, designed to destroy my reputation and tarnish the work I have done for this galaxy." Lila's stomach twisted as she listened to Serafina speak, her words so carefully chosen, her demeanor so composed. Serafina had always been a master manipulator, and now she was using that skill to turn the council against them. "The truth," Serafina continued, her gaze sliding toward Lila with a look of feigned sympathy, "is that this young woman has been through a terrible tragedy. She has lost her family, her home, and now she seeks someone to blame. It's understandable. Really. But to make such outrageous claims without any solid proof. It's a sad, desperate act." Lila clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as Serafina's words slithered through the chamber like poison. She could see the doubt spreading among the counselors, the whispers growing louder. Serafina was turning them against her, twisting the narrative as she had done so many times before. But Lila wouldn't let her win. "That's a lie," Lila said, stepping forward, her voice shaking with anger. "You killed my father. You killed my mother. You've destroyed lives, ruined families, all for your own power. This isn't about my grief, it's about the truth. And you know it." The room fell into a tense silence. For a moment, Serafina's mask slipped, and Lila saw a flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or fear, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You have no proof," Serafina said, her voice low and dangerous. "And without proof, your accusations are nothing more than the delusions of a grieving child." Lila's heart pounded in her chest. Serafina was right. They had the documents, the records, but they didn't have the one thing that would make everything irrefutable: a witness, someone who could stand before the council and testify to Serafina's crimes. But then, as if fate had intervened, a voice rang out from the back of the chamber. "She's telling the truth." All eyes turned to the entrance of the chamber, where a figure stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him, one of the former political leaders whose family had been destroyed by Serafina's schemes. He had been in hiding for years, presumed dead by many, but here he was, stepping into the light, ready to expose the truth. "I was there," the man said, his voice steady. "I was part of the council that Serafina manipulated, part of the group she used to orchestrate her rise to power. I saw it all. She's responsible for everything Lila has accused her of and more." The chamber erupted into chaos, the counselors shouting over one another, some demanding Serafina's immediate arrest, others calling for an investigation. Serafina's calm facade shattered as she realized that her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling before her eyes. "No," Serafina cried, her voice sharp and venomous. "You're lying. This is a setup." But it was too late. The tide had turned. The counselors who had once been swayed by Serafina's charm and influence were now demanding answers, demanding justice. Guards moved forward to take Serafina into custody, but she wasn't going down without a fight. With a swift, practiced motion, she drew a hidden blade from her sleeve, her eyes wild with fury. She lunged toward Lila, the blade gleaming in the chamber's dim light. But before she could strike, Johnson was there. He moved faster than Lila could comprehend, intercepting Serafina's attack with a skill born of years of experience. There was a brief, intense struggle, the sound of metal clashing against metal, and then it was over. Serafina's blade clattered to the floor, and she was restrained by the guards, her face twisted in rage and defeat. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she was dragged away. "I'll make you all pay." Lila stood frozen, her heart racing, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. It was over. Serafina was defeated, but as the weight of it all settled over her, she realized that this was only the beginning. Serafina had been brought to justice, but the damage she had done across the galaxy, to her family, to so many others, would take years to unravel. And though the immediate threat was gone, Lila knew that the fight for justice was far from over. The corridors of the Galactic Council's headquarters felt strangely empty after the uproar of Serafina's arrest. The heavy silence was a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted mere hours before, when Serafina had lunged at Lila with murderous intent, her empire of lies and deceit crumbling around her. Now, the once powerful woman was locked away in a high-security cell, awaiting her trial. Lila walked beside Johnson, her mind heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. They had succeeded in bringing Serafina down. The proof of her crimes, combined with the testimony of the former political leader who had come forward, had been enough to turn the council against her. She was finished. And yet, As Lila moved through the grand halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a temporary victory. "She'll be tried," Johnson said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "And she'll be sentenced. The evidence is overwhelming. There's no way she can escape this." Lila nodded, but her brow remained furrowed. "I know. But Serafina wasn't working alone. She has allies, powerful ones. We've only taken down one part of the web. The rest of it is still out there, lurking in the shadows." Johnson stopped, turning to face her. His expression was grim, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or pride. "You're right," he said. "This isn't the end. But it's a start. We've exposed her, and now the rest of her network will be scrambling to cover their tracks. That gives us an advantage." Lila met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. It was true, this was just the beginning. Serafina had been the figurehead, the visible part of a much larger operation. There were others like her, hidden in the shadows, pulling strings, waiting for the right moment to strike. But now that Serafina had been exposed, Lila knew they would be on high alert. They would come for her, just as Serafina had. But for the first time since her parents' deaths, Lila wasn't afraid. "I'm not going to stop," she said, her voice steady. "There are still so many people out there who have suffered because of her. People who have lost their families, their homes, just like I did. I'm going to keep fighting for them." Johnson's expression softened, and he gave her a small, approving nod. "I didn't expect anything less." They continued down the corridor in silence, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Lila glanced at Johnson, wondering about the scars he carried, the battles he had fought before their paths had crossed. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had saved her life, stood by her side through every danger, and now he had helped her take down the woman who had destroyed her family. A deep bond had formed between them, one forged in fire, in shared pain and triumph. As they approached the exit of the council building, the grand doors opened to reveal the sprawling city of Telmaris bathed in the warm glow of the setting suns. The twin stars of Zenara hung low in the sky, casting the capital in shades of gold and crimson. The air was warm and smelled faintly of the desert that stretched beyond the city's borders, a reminder that even in the heart of civilization, nature still held sway. They stepped out onto the wide stone steps leading down to the streets below, and Lila paused, taking in the sight before her. The city was alive with movement, people bustling through the markets, airships soaring overhead, the hum of life continuing as it always had. But for Lila, everything felt different now. The weight she had carried for so long, the grief and anger that had defined her every action since her parents' deaths, had begun to lift. She had sought justice, and she had found it. And in the process, she had discovered something even more powerful, her own strength. But as Lila stood there, bathed in the glow of the setting suns, a realization began to dawn on her. She no longer wanted to return to the life she had known before. The world of luxury and privilege that had once been her home now felt foreign to her, like a distant memory from a past life. She had changed, grown in ways she could never have imagined, and the path that lay before her now was one of her own choosing. Lila Johnson's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him watching her, a question in his eyes. "What happens now?" Lila smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "We keep going." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The trial of Serafina became the focus of galactic attention, with news of her crimes spreading across the stars like wildfire. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions to discuss the implications of the conspiracy, and investigative teams were dispatched to uncover the rest of Serafina's network. Her assets were seized, her allies interrogated, and the galaxy's core systems were placed on high alert. Lila and Johnson remained in Telmaris, watching from the sidelines as the wheels of justice turned. It was strange to see Serafina's name plastered across the news feeds, to hear commentators discussing the very crimes Lila had fought so hard to expose. The galaxy had finally woken up to the threat Serafina posed, but it didn't feel like the victory Lila had imagined. One afternoon, as Lila stood on the balcony of their temporary quarters, gazing out at the city below, she felt a presence beside her. Johnson had joined her, his arms crossed as he leaned against the railing. "It doesn't feel like it's over, does it?" he asked quietly. Lila shook her head. "No, not really." Johnson sighed, his gaze distant. "That's the thing about justice. It never really feels like enough. There are always more pieces to pick up, more people who were hurt along the way, but it's a start. Lila turned to him, studying his profile as the golden light of the suns cast long shadows across his face. What about you? You've been fighting this battle for longer than I have. Does it ever get easier? Johnson's lips quirked into a wry smile. Easier? No, but you learn to keep going. You learn to find meaning in the small victories. You take down one enemy, and another rises up. But that's the nature of the galaxy, isn't it? There's always something or someone worth fighting for. Lila nodded, understanding his words on a deeper level now. She had fought for her family, for her parents' memory. But now, as she looked out at the sprawling city below, she realized she was fighting for something even bigger, something greater than herself. There were so many people across the galaxy who had been victims of Seraphina's greed and ambition, so many lives torn apart by the corruption and violence that festered in the shadows of power. And while Seraphina's arrest was a step toward justice, it was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Are you going to stay with the resistance? Lila asked, her voice soft. Johnson turned to her, his expression thoughtful. I don't know. I've been part of the resistance for a long time, but he trailed off, as if searching for the right words. Maybe it's time for something new. Lila's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope sparking within her. New. Johnson met her gaze, his eyes intense and unwavering. You've got a fire in you, Lila. I've seen it. And I think you and I could do a lot of good out there. Together. A warmth spread through Lila's chest at his words. She had felt it too, the bond that had formed between them over the course of their journey. They had been through so much together, faced danger and loss, but also triumph and hope. Johnson had become more than just an ally to her. He was someone she trusted, someone she respected, and perhaps someone she could build a future with. I think you're right, Lila said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. There's a lot of work left to do. Johnson's smile was small, but genuine. Then let's do it. Together. As the trial of Seraphina progressed, Lila and Johnson quietly prepared for the next phase of their journey. They knew that while Seraphina had been brought to justice, the galaxy was still filled with those who sought power at any cost, those who would exploit the vulnerable and manipulate the system for their own gain. And they weren't going to stand by and watch it happen. The resistance was growing, bolstered by the news of Seraphina's downfall. Across the galaxy, people were rising up against corruption and oppression, inspired by the courage of those who had exposed the conspiracy. It was a movement, a revolution of sorts, and Lila found herself at the heart of it. She no longer saw herself as the sheltered daughter of Lord Calais. She was something else now, a fighter, a survivor, and with Johnson by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. On the day of Seraphina's sentencing, Lila stood outside the courthouse, watching as the crowd gathered, reporters and onlookers eager to witness the final chapter of the scandal that had rocked the galaxy. But Lila wasn't there for the spectacle. She had already said her goodbyes to the past. Now, she was looking toward the future. As the doors to the courthouse opened and Seraphina was led away in chains, Lila felt a strange sense of closure. The woman who had destroyed her family was gone, her empire reduced to nothing, but Lila's journey was far from over. She glanced at Johnson, who stood beside her, his expression calm but resolute. Ready? He asked, his voice steady. Lila nodded. Ready. With one last look at the courthouse, they turned and walked away, leaving the past behind them. The galaxy awaited, vast and uncertain, but filled with possibilities. And together, they would face it.